Hi everybody, welcome to the Arthropod class of IMN. This is Annie Svensson, environmental educator.
This is Derek Walsh, Director of Natural Resources and Research.
So we'll go ahead and get started. So, like I said, we will be covering arthropods. And to get started, we'll just do a brief overview of arthropods. So, as you might know, it is from arthropods or phylum Arthropoda, and it is a huge phylum in the animal kingdom. As you can see, there's about 1.1 million named species, with many more unnamed species. As you can imagine, there are lots of small arthropods, so it's hard to find all of them. It is the most diverse and, like I said, abundant phylum. It includes lots of members that you're, of course, familiar with, like spiders and ticks, but it also includes things like crustaceans and millipedes and stuff like that. We'll cover all of this a little bit more in depth here in just a little bit. Just as a brief overview, these are invertebrates with exoskeletons. So that means that they don't have a backbone and they have no internal skeleton, but many of them have an external hard covering or something of the sort. They all have segmented bodies. Some of them have several tagmata. Some of them only have two. We'll kind of see a little bit of that as we go forward. They have jointed appendages, so you'll see some of their legs are jointed and their arms, whatnot. Well, maybe they don't technically have arms, but and then they are eaters of all sorts. So they are carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores. And as you could guess, they are found all over the place, including marine and freshwater habitats. We, of course, know that they lived in terrestrial habitats too. So just a fun fact to break it up already, but a lot of people, including myself, and I'm sure most of you too, call just about everything a bug. However, true bugs actually belong to the order Hemiptera. I probably didn't say that right. But and there is some confusion on this order. Some people call it the order Heteroptera. Some people divide Hemiptera and Homoptera into something different. There's just a little bit of disagreement, and that happens in the science world. But a true bug is a lot different than some of the other things that we might refer to as bugs. So it includes bed bugs, stink bugs, water striders, and stuff like that. This pie chart is just a representation of how abundant the phylum Arthropoda actually is. So as you can see, insects, which is a class of Arthropoda, is 75% of all animals. Other arthropods, which we'll talk about, 11%, and then all the other animals are 14%. So we often think that humans are top dog, and you can see that, we're very well outnumbered here. Another fun fact, there are about a billion arthropods alive at any time. So that's 160 million arthropods for each person on Earth. And that is not a typo. I did mean a billion. That's a lot of zeros. I couldn't tell you how many, but that's a lot of animals.
So one thing we had mentioned that as a characteristic of arthropods is exoskeletons. So here is a representation of a comparison between an endo and an exoskeleton. Endo meaning inside and exo meaning outside. So on the left, it's a representation of a human arm. So, you can see we have the skin, and then inside the skin is the muscle and then the bone, the skeleton. Whereas an exoskeleton, so showing an insect leg, you have the stiff plate on the outside and then the muscles on the inside that are connected to that stiff plate. So the specific definition is a rigid external covering for the body in some invertebrate animals, especially arthropods, providing both support and protection. We also mentioned segmentation as a characteristic of arthropods. And segmentation is the division of some animal and plant body plans into a series of repetitive segments. So here we have three examples of different arthropods. So centipedes, they have a head, body, and tail, and that is characteristic of all centipedes. Insects have head, thorax, and abdomen. And crayfish, which is a type of crustacean, has the cephalothorax and abdomen. And so again, there's segmentation throughout all of the phylum Arthropoda. Before we go into the specifics of each of the four subphyla, I just wanted to show this phylogenetic tree. So a phylogenetic tree is a diagram that depicts the lines of evolutionary descent, and it can be used for either species, organisms, or genes from a common ancestor. So this phylogenetic tree, from left to right, shows the evolutionary history of these four subphyla. So from a common ancestor, we can see chelicerates, which include spiders, split off. Um, so they're more closely related to their common ancestor, and then diverged into the groupings, which then split off into myriapods, and then that diverged from the last common ancestor of the crustaceans and hexapods. And we have here some key terms to remember when learning about arthropods. So we mentioned segmentation and exoskeleton, but there's also metamorphosis. So that's the process of transformation from an immature form to an adult form in two or more distinct stages. And then ecdysis, also more commonly known as molting, and it's the act of molting or shedding an outer cuticular layer, or your your outermost layer.
So the first subphylum we'll talk about is subphylum Myriapoda, and that includes centipedes and millipedes. So as you can see, we'll be discussing centipedes on this slide. And the difference between centipedes and millipedes is that centipedes have one pair of legs per segment, whereas millipedes have two pairs of legs per segment. And both of them have somewhat flattened bodies, and you can find them all over the place. You have probably seen them in your basement if you have a basement, but specifically in the natural environment, you can find them under logs, bark, and stones. They actually are carnivores, so they'll eat cockroaches and other insects and also earthworms. And these guys do have venom fangs. However, they're not harmful to humans. They're not large enough to be harmful to us. But I do believe there are some species in the tropics, where these centipedes could be harmful to humans. So millipedes, also a part of subphylum Myriapoda, and that interprets as 1,000 feet. However, that's not literal. They don't have thousands of feet. That would be a rather large millipede if they did. But like I said, they have two pairs of legs per segment, and they actually have a cylindrical body, not flattened, like I said on the last slide. So please excuse that. And they also prefer dark, moist environments. So you'll find myriapods, millipedes, and centipedes in somewhat similar environments. But the difference here is that millipedes are mostly herbivores, and they'll eat decayed plant matter. Um, and they secrete a toxic or repellent fluid. And I believe I've heard that it actually smells like almonds, but I would have to check on that. We can discuss that when we're together in class. Next up is subphylum Chelicerata or chelicerates, and they are defined by having chelicerate mouth parts, which is a pair of appendages in front of the mouth, usually jaw-like or fang-like. So spiders are in subphylum chelicerates. So if you think of those appendages at the front of their face, that's kind of what you can think of as those chelicerate mouth parts. These animals usually have six pairs of appendages. And normally, I think we only think of chelicerates as being spiders, but it includes horseshoe crabs, ticks and mites as well, scorpions and false scorpions, and some sea spiders. Um, it's kind of a cool thing is these horseshoe crabs. As you can see in the picture, they're from one of the classes of subphylum Chelicerata. They're oftentimes called living fossils because they haven't changed much over 250 million years. So this animal has been around for a really long time and has basically looked the same for that same amount of time. So we could assume that evolutionarily, um, how their body is made up is working for them, seeing as they haven't changed much. So, like I said, oftentimes we associate chelicerates with class Arachnida, which is spiders. Um, but again, there are other animals in this phylum. like I said, some scorpions, pseudoscorpions, ticks, mites, and daddy longlegs. Daddy longlegs are arachnids, but they are not spiders, interestingly enough. Um, the difference there is that they have two eyes compared to a spider's eight, and their bodies are rounded with a fused cephalothorax. They also can't make silk or venom. As you can see on the sides, spider silk is very, very strong. Given the right circumstances, is stronger than steel threads of the same diameter. Um, and like I mentioned, daddy longlegs don't have venom, but spiders do, so they can't chew. So they have to be able to inject their prey with venom, and they kind of suck the body parts out of the animal that they're eating after, because the venom kind of disintegrates the body parts, if you will. And let's see, yeah. So there are 40,000 species of spiders across the world, so a ton of different types of spiders. And I think we can all probably safely say that there are also many, many people that are afraid of spiders. However, they're generally harmless and actually super helpful in controlling pests. They will eat other insects that we might consider pests. Um, so they're great to have around. So the two spiders that I'm sure you're aware of that we do have to worry about are the brown recluse and the black widow. So both of those contain venom that are harmful to humans if they bite. Um, Normally, though, these spiders aren't very aggressive, so they actually don't bite very often. And as you can see in the name of the brown recluse, the brown recluse and the black widow are both reclusive. So they generally like to keep to themselves in places that are undisturbed. Um, but you might find a brown recluse in maybe a closet in your house that's not used very often, or maybe a barn or shed or other dry place. Um, and if one is bitten by a brown recluse, their venom is what we call hemolytic. That produces death of tissues and skin surrounding the bite. Whereas a black widow, their venom is neurotoxic, so it acts on the nervous system. So those bites actually can cause death, but it's 4 to 5 bites out of every 1,000 bites that are reported to be fatal. So again, obviously not very encouraging, but like I said, the bites can be harmful, but neither spider is aggressive. So normally you won't be finding yourself in an area probably with these spiders, and even so, they don't really want to mess with you. A few other native species here. We've got about 400 species of spiders in Indiana, so it's hard to cover all of them. But some that you might see are the fishing spider, the wolf spider, the jumping spider, and harvestman, which, like I said, isn't a spider, but it is a type of arachnid. The next subphylum is subphylum Crustacea. So cresta in Latin means shell, so many of these animals have hard shells. Not all of them do, though. Another somewhat large subphylum with 67,000 described species. And a lot of these you don't find here because a lot of them are marine. Um, so they includes lobsters, crayfishes, shrimp, crabs, copepods, ostracods, water fleas, whale lice, and krill. So obviously we're not very concerned about whale lice and krill. However, we do have crayfish here in Indiana and actually in Westland Woods. Another type of animal from subphylum Crustacea is extinct, but is the trilobite, which is the picture you're seeing on the right there. And those actually have been found, the fossils of those have been found in Indiana, because a long, long time ago, we actually were covered in a shallow sea. So they were marine animals. So these guys lived here, and there's somewhere around here where you can actually go and look for the fossils of trilobites. You're not allowed to take them with you, but it is something that you can do here in Indiana. And crustaceans, in addition to having a shell, which obviously some other arthropods do as well, but they have two pairs of antennae, which is different from other types of arthropods. So, like I said, not a lot of these animals will be here in Indiana, but crayfish are at Wesselman Woods. If you're on East Trail and probably some other trails too, you can see their mud chimneys. Crayfish actually live in a variety of habitats, including streams with or without currents, and they can also burrow in grasslands and floodplains. I'm not 100% certain on what type of crayfish we have here in Indiana or in Evansville, but I would definitely say that they are probably burrowing. We also have a stream back on East Trail too, with given enough water, it can flow too. So yeah, they are also a great food source for snapping turtles, frogs, raccoons, river otters, and some other animals, all of which we have here in Evansville. A lot of in West Longwoods, not river otters, but so those crayfish are a good food source for other animals. And lastly, for subphylum Crustacea, it also includes order Isopoda, which are pill bugs, or maybe more commonly known as roly-polies. Those also kind of live all over the place. We're probably most familiar with the terrestrial kind. Um, and they are said to be one of the only crustaceans to have become truly terrestrial, which is kind of cool. And as you are probably familiar with, they oftentimes roll into a tight ball, and that is for protection. These are just a few examples of crustaceans that you might find in Indiana. The Sloan's crayfish there on the left is actually a rare animal here in Indiana, so it might not necessarily be finding one of those um, as easily. But we do have the Indiana crayfish, as you can see there in the middle, and then also the common pillbug. According to a study published in 2001, Indiana has 19 species of crayfish. That number could obviously be different because that was quite some time ago, but that's the best number that we have.
All right, and next up is the other 75% of all animal species, the hexapods, which is oftentimes synonymous with insects. There is a very small class called Antognatha, but it's much, much smaller. So for the purposes of this, we're going to focus on insects. So insects are the class Insecta. Their body, as we discussed, is divided into three distinct segments: the head, thorax, and abdomen. They have three pairs of jointed legs for six total legs. They have compound eyes, which we'll discuss, one pair of antennae, and they usually have two pairs of wings. There are some exceptions. So for insects like lice, fleas, and ants, there are zero pairs of wings. And for flies, there can be one pair of wings. And as a testament to their diversity and abundance, there are more than 1 million described insect species. There are about 7,000 discovered each year, and an estimated 10 million undiscovered insect species. And the study of insects is called entomology. Do not get this confused with etymology, which is the study of words. Unless you like confusing people, um, make sure to distinguish entomology from etymology. So here we see two images of an insect body plan. So the ant on the left is a kind of a clearer example of, and you can see the clear distinctions between the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And you can see as well the antenna, the mouth parts, and the legs and wings. And on the right, I believe that's a beetle. And some other insects as well are the divisions between the body parts are not as distinct as insects like ants. But you can see there's the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, as well as the layout of other parts of the body. Okay, next up is the compound eye. So the compound eye of an insect is composed of a large number of identical unit eyes called facets or ommatidia. And you can kind of see on the left here that there's all the individual little dots, and those are each identical. So each unit has a lens which focuses the light, and it has pigments for detecting color. And insects with large globular eyes, like the one in the picture, can have 360-degree panoramic view, which means they do not have to turn their heads to get a sense of their environment. The advantages of this is it removes obvious blind spots. It's actually a part of the reason why flies can see you coming and dodge your swatting attempts even if they are facing away from you. Um, and in terms of what the image they see, obviously we can't see that, but we can interpret or guess what that might mean. So on the top right, you can see the human version of a flower and the insect version of flower image. So unlike the Hollywood image where each individual facet produces the same image and they're movies show almost like a kaleidoscope vision of insects. That is not the case. It is more so a blurrier image that detects color and movement, and is not a kaleidoscope. And we had also mentioned in the wildflowers class that some insects can see ultraviolet light. So these, especially on flowers, the ultraviolet light from the flower can act as almost landing strips that show pollinators which flowers to land on. Another important characteristic of the vast majority of insects is metamorphosis. So, as mentioned, metamorphosis is the process of transformation from an immature form to an adult form in two or more distinct stages. And 80% of all insects go through metamorphosis. And there are two types. More commonly known is the complete metamorphosis, also known as holometabolous. So this is four stages. So you have the egg, the larvae, the pupa, and the adult. That's shown on the left in this image here. This includes things like butterflies, moths, ants, bees, beetles, and flies. And then the other one is incomplete or gradual metamorphosis, which is called hemimetabolous. And this is three stages. So there's egg, nymph, and adult. And this occurs in grasshoppers, dragonflies, termites, and true bugs. Another characteristic of some insects is that they're social, which the scientific term for social insects is eusocial. So social insects have overlapping generations within a large colony. They have cooperative brood care, meaning the larvae are cared for by many adults. And there's a division of labor into reproductive and non-reproductive groups. So this includes all ants and termites, as well as some bees and wasps. And the division of labor is oftentimes beyond reproductive tasks. So for bees, for example, some of the tasks include tending to the queen, feeding the brood, expanding the colony, collecting nectar and pollen, among other tasks. And one very interesting thing is that social insects constitute 75% of all insect biomass, yet they make up just 2% of all insect species. So what that means is if you were to take the mass of all the insects in the world, 75% of the mass occurs within ants, termites, and some of the bees and wasps that are social, yet they're just 2% of the species. And in comparison, we have solitary insects like this mantid here. So they live on their own except to mate, and any insect is considered solitary if it does not exhibit any of the characteristics of social insects. So now that we know a little bit about insects, well, what are the most common and largest orders? So the most abundant is Coleoptera or beetles. So globally there are 350,000 species of beetles, with 24,000 in North America and 3,000 in Indiana, which is quite a lot. Next up is Lepidoptera, which is butterflies and moths. And for a lot of these, I couldn't find Indiana specific numbers, but Lepidoptera has 180,000 global species, almost 15,000 species in North America. Then there's Hymenoptera, which is bees, wasps, and ants, with 150,000 worldwide and 18,000 in North America. Then Diptera, or flies, 150,000 globally, 17,000 in North America. Then there is Hemiptera, which is the true bugs. So cicadas, aphids, bed bugs, and true bugs is 80,000 globally, with 10,000 in North America. Orthoptera, crickets, grasshoppers, and katydids is 25,000 worldwide, with just over 1,000 in Indiana. And lastly is Odonata, which is dragonflies and damselflies, 6,500 worldwide and 400 in North America. And this is just to note, there are 29 orders of insects. So these are just some of the largest, but there are some that are much smaller.
As Derek mentioned, ants are one of the social insects, which make up a very large biomass on Earth. And this is just a fun fact, but there are nearly as many species of ants, so 8,800, as there are species of birds in the world. There are 9,000 species of birds in the world. So whenever you see those little insects on the ground or maybe in your house, there's maybe just no telling what kind of ant it is.
So there are thousands of native insects in Indiana, so it would take way too long to discuss all several thousand of them. So to save some time, I'm just going to highlight six of them. So in the upper left is the six-spotted tiger beetle. They have this gorgeous kind of shiny emerald green exoskeleton, and they're named for the six white spots on their wings. And one cool thing about tiger beetles in general is they can run so fast that their eyes can't keep up. So they need to pause occasionally to get their bearings. Evolutionarily, they are built for speed. So the fastest tiger beetle can run 5.6 miles per hour, which is not fast for us, but that is about 171 body lengths per second, which if that were scaled up to human size, it would run about 720 miles per hour. So they are built for speed. Next up is the eastern tiger swallowtail. It's one of them seen here in the upper center, named the tiger for the black and kind of yellowish orange stripes. And it's one of the most common eastern butterflies in North America. It's about 3 to 5.5 inches from tip to tip on their wings. And the name swallowtail, it comes from the tail-like extensions on the hind wings that you can see there in the bottom of the picture. The common eastern bumblebee, I always laugh that the genus for bumblebees is Bombus. I just like that. I think that's pretty funny. This is the most encountered bumblebee species in eastern North America. And actually there are 48 different bumblebee species in North America. So there's a lot of bombuses. And they're social insects that live in colonies like we had discussed. Then we have the eastern pond hawk. It's a dragonfly. It's a very aggressive dragonfly species. So males are blue and females are green, as shown in the picture. They are highly effective predators. So their legs are equipped with kind of these spines that form an effective basket to hold their prey. They'll prey on very large insects and even dragonflies the same size. Next is the common true katydid. So in North America, there's 255 species of katydids. In the Midwest, there's about 20. And as like the one shown in the picture, they're usually green and they blend in very well with the leaves. This particular species is more commonly heard than seen, so they contribute to kind of the symphony you hear in the evening in the warmer months during the summer. But this one here is much higher up in the canopy, so it's not easy to see, but they're very vocal during the evening. And our last species highlight is the annual cicada. So there are 16 species of annual cicadas in Indiana. The nymphs will emerge from the ground between June and August, and the adults, when they molt, when they go through ecdysis into their adult stage, they're about 1 inch to 1.5 inches long, which is quite large. They do look kind of terrifying sometimes, but they're harmless. They are also frequently heard but not seen, and you can often find their shedded nymph layer around. Speaking of cicadas, this summer is a very big event. So coming soon to a forest near you is the double emergence of periodical cicadas. So annual cicadas, as mentioned, they emerge every year. And it's not a simultaneous emergence. The nymphs will emerge from the soil not simultaneously. But with periodical cicadas, these emerge at the same time. At least the individuals in the same brood. So there are two different types of periodical cicadas, the 13-year and the 17-year cicadas. So what that means is the nymphs have lived underground for either 13 years or 17 years. So the eggs were laid in the soil 13 years ago or 17 years ago. And this year there's a double emergence. So the blue is the 17-year cicadas, and those are emerging in kind of central and northern Illinois and just a little bit in northwest Indiana. And then we have the 13-year cicadas, which are shown in the red. They are emerging throughout the South and the Midwest. And there is just a small area of crossover between the two, and that's in central Illinois. So for any bug enthusiasts, right, because cicadas are true bugs, any cicada or bug enthusiasts, sometime this summer, there may be a symphony of really loud cicada noises. And even in southwest Indiana, there will be emergence of some of the 13-year cicadas. So keep an ear out and an eye out for cicadas. They'll start emerging in late April further down south because the soil warms up quicker. And then throughout the summer, we will hear a symphony of cicadas. So now that we've learned about the different groupings of arthropods, some of the native species, I want to talk about the ecological importance. And, you know, they do make up 85% of all animals, so they have a huge range of ecological importance and ecological roles, but I'm going to highlight some of the common ones. So the first off is pollination. I'm sure you've all seen bees or butterflies pollinating the flowers in your garden or in your yard. We're here at Wesselman. So at least 75% of all flowering plants, so that's over 180,000 plant species, rely on animal pollination. So there are some mammals and birds that pollinate, but the majority of pollinators are insects. And there's about 35% of all crop species rely on animal pollination. So the common saying is 1 out of every 3 bites of food you can thank an insect pollinator. And this is incredibly important for reproduction of plants. The next up is herbivory. So we can see this caterpillar here munching on a nice leaf. And about half of all insects are herbivores. And so what this does is it helps to regulate and moderate plant growth. It controls plant populations so that they don't take over. And then the feces of herbivores adds nutrients to the soil, providing further ecological benefits. Next up, we have decomposition. So here we can see millipedes. And millipedes are important because they feed on leaf litter. And if you look closely, you will find millipedes crawling through the leaf litter in Wesselman Woods. But decomposers break apart dead organisms into materials which primary producers like plants can use as nutrients. Another example is carrion beetles. So it's not just plants that they decompose, but it's also dead animals. So carrion beetles help to decompose dead animals as well as flies. Even fallen down dead trees, isopods, the roly-polies, can help to break down dead wood. Then we have parasitism. So this includes things like ticks, lice, fleas, and mites. And ticks, as shown in the picture, they sometimes the role of parasites is not as clear, but for ticks, they're agents of disease that help to keep deer populations in check. Then we have in the bottom middle, there's a spider. It has something tasty that's caught up in its web, and predators. So they help to keep their prey populations in check. One of them that we like to keep in check is mosquitoes, and we can thank spiders for keeping the mosquito populations in check. And then lastly, seed dispersal. And we can thank ants for a lot of that. So within North America, about 35% of herbaceous plants in the understory of forests in North America rely on ants for seed dispersal. So they disperse a whole lot of the wildflower species that we learned about. And they only disperse the seeds a very short distance, so widespread dispersal requires large old forests. But these are just a few of the many different ecological roles arthropods. As we learned from the invasive species class, there can be a disruption in the ecological balance of ecosystems with invasive species. And so I want to highlight one invasive species that has been a significant threat to forests of eastern North America, and that is the emerald ash borer. So the emerald ash borer is a wood-boring beetle. It's native to northeastern Asia, so China, Mongolia, parts of eastern Russia, Korea. And what they do is they lay their eggs on the bark, and then when the larvae hatch, they bore into the tree and they feed on the vascular tissue of the ash trees. And for ash trees around in their native range in East Asia, it does not kill the tree. It maybe occasionally kills the tree, but it does not kill the tree because they've co-evolved with each other. But for North American ash trees, it kills the tree within 2 to 5 years of infestation, depending on the level of infestation. Native bark beetles, on the other hand, or other forest pathogens, other arthropod forest pathogens, have co-evolved with their host plant species, and so the native plants are occasionally killed by native forest arthropods or bark beetles, but many survive because they've co-evolved. But with emerald ash borer, some eastern deciduous forests of North America have experienced a 99% mortality in ash trees, which is quite concerning. So this slide shows two maps showing the extent of emerald ash borer. But first, under normal native forest pathogens, the killing of trees moderates and regulates the forest composition. It causes gaps in the forest canopy that may increase plant species diversity, and it adds an accumulation of dead wood to the ground, which is habitat for other arthropods, amphibians, reptiles, fungi. But with emerald ash borer, it's happening at an alarming rate. So emerald ash borer was first detected in just outside of Detroit in 2002, so in southeast Michigan. And the map on the left shows the risk. It's a 2014 map showing the risk, green being low risk, red being high risk. And as you can see, spreading outwards from southeast Michigan, very high risk. And then the map on the right is from 2019, showing the red dots are the county level reports of infestations, and the green shows the extent of the range of ash trees. And as you can see, emerald ash borer has been found in a significant area of the range of ash trees. So with an insect like emerald ash borer, right, which kills up to 99% of ash trees in a stand, it poses a significant threat to forest health. It could be considered a forest health epidemic because it is so widespread and is causing, a ecological disruption. So since detection in Detroit in 2002, it has spread to 36 states. So it's already killed tens of millions of ash trees, and it threatens to kill most of the 8.7 billion ash trees throughout North America. And I know that's a bit of a dire note, but I think it is important for us all to grapple with the reality, because there are things we can do to prevent that. So under normal, flying, right, they can fly and spread their range about a mile per year. But the biggest factor in their rapid spread has been firewood. So infested firewood has caused the infestation of emerald ash borer to spread rapidly. So with assistance from humans, they spread up to 30 miles per year. So for things we can do not transport firewood from one place to another. Use local firewood because you can really contribute to this scary forest epidemic. Sorry to be dire, but it's important for us to acknowledge. And lastly, another not super optimistic note, but another important one, is the global insect decline, the global arthropod decline. So several studies over the past several years have analyzed, there have been meta-analysis. So some studies have reviewed other studies and compiled data from many different years, many different regions, and they have found that the world has lost 5 to 10% of all insect species in the last 150 years. So that's a few 100,000 insect species that have been lost. Um, Insect populations have declined by about 45% in the last 40 years. So that's almost a decrease by half. And there's anecdotal evidence. Um, People reporting that several decades ago they would be able to collect the lightning bugs in their yard easily. Fill a bunch of them, fill a jar with a bunch of them. But nowadays, it's not nearly as common to be able to do that. And yearly, insect abundance is declining around 1 to 2% per year. And there's about 40% of insect species that are declining and 33% are endangered. So not a great outlook for insects. And the main drivers of this, it's the main drivers for a lot of species loss throughout the world, but it's habitat loss, industrial farming, light pollution, urban sprawl, and the spread of invasive plants, among others. And the continued decline of insects could have very dire consequences on ecosystems and food production, right? Because it's a significant factor in the pollination and the supply of food for humans. Um, and I'm sorry to end on a dire note, but as people, as we all are interested in the natural world, it's important for us to grapple with the realities of what is happening in the natural world around us. And it's important for us to start thinking about conservation beyond just the charismatic species that get conservation. The elephants and the rhinos and the big mammals that we all love. It's also important to think about the basis of a lot of food chains. The Arguably the most important animals throughout our ecosystems. It's important to start thinking about conservation actions for insects and arthropods and for all ecosystems.
Eric said the information that we ended on is obviously kind of hard to grapple with, but I think there are positives too. I think it's excellent that there are folks like you interested in taking courses like Indiana Master Naturalist because the more that we know, the more that we can help. So it's important to become educated, and then once we know these things too, we can help educate others as well. But this is the end of our presentation. Here's a beautiful Luna moth to leave us off with something a little beautiful. And then if you have any questions, of course, feel free to reach out to myself or Derek, and we will both look forward to our arthropod practical here in a little bit.